Who was Solomon? Have you ever wondered if everything they say about him is true? After all, how could a king who had all wisdom, wealth, and power end his life so controversially? Solomon was more than just the wisest man of his time. He built the temple of God, ruled Israel during its greatest glory, and received favor unmatched by any other king. But at the same time, his choices led him down a dangerous path. What really happened to him? Why does his story ultimately serve as both an inspiration and a warning? On this journey, you will discover the true story of Solomon, beyond what many people usually tell. Uncover the secrets of his life, his relationships, and the mistakes that led him to an unexpected ending. Now, let's delve into the story of the Bible's most enigmatic king. Solomon was not David's firstborn son, and did not seem a natural candidate for the throne of Israel. His birth occurred in a turbulent environment marked by mistakes and consequences. His father, King David, had a controversial affair with his mother, Bathsheba, which led to the death of her first husband. This episode brought divine punishment to the house of David, but it also opened a new chapter in Israel's history. From this union, Solomon was born. And despite his difficult origins, God had special plans for him. David's eldest sons were the natural heirs, especially Adonijah, who considered himself the rightful successor. However, from an early age, Solomon attracted the attention of his father and the prophet Nathan. Nathan was God's instrument in opposing David. Nathan not only rebuked the king for his sins, but also confirmed that God had chosen Solomon. Recognizing the importance of this decision, David prepared his son for kingship, training him in leadership and obedience to God. As the years passed, David aged, and his strength began to wane. It was at this moment that Adonijah saw a golden opportunity to secure the throne for himself. He gathered powerful allies, such as the army commander Joab and the priest Abiathar, without his father's consent. This approach was not simply an act of ambition, but an attempt to seize and usurp power in the kingdom. But this position was ordained by God for someone else. If Adonijah succeeded, Solomon and his mother would be in danger. Bathsheba, recognizing the threat, acted quickly and went to David. Together with Nathan, they reminded him of God's promise and the need to confirm Solomon as king before it was too late. David, even in his old and frail state, made an immediate decision. He ordered Solomon anointed and crowned king of Israel before the people, with the support of the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan. This act not only thwarted Adonijah's plans, but also secured Solomon's claim to the throne. When Adonijah learned of Solomon's coronation, his pride quickly gave way to fear. He ran to the altar and grabbed its edges. It was a gesture of pleading for mercy, as he understood his actions could be construed as treason. Solomon, showing the first traces of prudence, decided at that moment to spare him, allowing him to live, since he no longer posed a threat to the kingdom. After David's death, Solomon officially became king and consolidated his position. But ascending the throne was a matter of power. Solomon needed to ensure the stability of the kingdom and follow the commandments his father left him before his death. David advised Solomon to be strong, obey God, and fight the enemies who could still threaten his power. Once Solomon fully assumed the kingship, he took decisive action. He dealt with all his enemies who posed a threat to his reign. With every threat eliminated, his reign began with order and power. Soon, he would show the world that his reign would not be ordinary. God had chosen Solomon for something far greater than simply ruling Israel. However, Solomon received his greatest recognition not for his strength or right to the throne, but for a special gift that transformed his life and made him one of the most important figures in biblical history. Solomon would be remembered not only as a king, but also as the wisest man who ever lived. But was this wisdom a divine gift or the result of his own intellect? This is what we will see next. Solomon had attained the status of king. But a ruler required more than just a title. It required insight, strategy, and, above all, wisdom. However, Solomon did not rely solely on his intellect or the experience inherited from his father David. He sought something greater, something no one had sought before. Soon after his coronation, Solomon had a remarkable encounter with God. The Lord appeared to him in a dream and made an extraordinary offer. He could ask for anything he wanted. He could have chosen wealth, military might or long life, but his answer was different. He asked for wisdom to rule justly and distinguish between good and evil. This request pleased God so much that Solomon, in addition to his incomparable wisdom, Solomon began his reign completely focused on God, but over the years his path changed. The king, who had received divine wisdom, built the great temple, and ruled Israel justly, began to stray from the right path. Small deviations accumulated until a fatal error compromised all he had achieved. The turning point in Solomon's life did not occur suddenly. His decline began almost imperceptibly. At first, he formed alliances with pagan peoples and accepted foreign wives into his palace. These unions were more than just political marriages. They brought with them new cultural and religious influences. At first, he maintained his devotion to the God of Israel, but gradually began to tolerate and even participate in the worship of other gods. Over time, Solomon ordered altars to foreign deities built on the hills around Jerusalem. The king, who had dedicated the temple to the Lord, now permitted sacrifices to pagan gods. This act was not just a personal transgression, but a grave sin that affected the entire nation of Israel. The nation chosen by God as holy and distinct was now mingled with pagan customs. Solomon's fatal mistake was allowing his heart to be divided. Instead of remaining faithful to God, he began to give way to other beliefs, justifying his decisions with a desire to please his wives and strengthen political alliances. But this choice had grave consequences. God was patient with Solomon, warning him through prophets and signs. However, when Solomon persisted in his error, divine judgment was pronounced. After his death, the kingdom would be divided. Israel, which had reached its peak under Solomon's reign, would now face a rupture that would forever change its history. At that moment, everything began to fall apart. The king, admired for his wisdom and justice, now saw himself marked by his own fall. His name, once synonymous with glory, became associated with disobedience and spiritual decay. Solomon's story teaches us an important truth. No matter how much wisdom or success a person has, if their heart turns away from God, consequences will follow. He had everything a person could desire: power, wealth, knowledge. But by abandoning his sincere devotion, he forfeited the greatest of all blessings, the full presence of God in his life. Solomon was living through the final years of his reign. The weight of his choices began to sink in, and his glory crumbled before his eyes. But how did he cope with this reality? Did he have any regrets? That's what we'll see next. Solomon's reign began with grand promises, but his final years were filled with regret and disappointment. The king, who had received divine wisdom, built the greatest temple in Israel's history and was revered by foreign nations, now faced the consequences of his choices. His end was not glorious, like that of a great ruler, but rather lonely, full of disappointments and afterthoughts about the mistakes he had made. The years passed. Solomon felt the effects of age and the decisions he had made throughout his reign. Separation from God and the influence of his foreign wives had not only spiritual but also political consequences. The stability Israel had enjoyed began to crumble, and the peace that had marked his reign began to give way to internal rebellions and external threats. People who had previously submitted to his rule began to rebel, seeing his weakness and the opportunity to challenge the empire he had built. The Bible mentions that God raised up Solomon's opponents in the final years of his reign. Hadad the Edomite, who had fled to Egypt during David's reign, returned and began attacking Israel. Another enemy, Rezon of Syria, also rebelled against Solomon, causing great instability. A name that would become decisive for the future of Israel began to gain power. Jeroboam, one of Solomon's servants, who would later lead the division of the kingdom. The prophecy of the division of the kingdom proved to be the final blow in Solomon's life. A prophet named Ahijah met Jeroboam and conveyed a message from God. Israel would be divided, and only part would remain under the rule of David's descendants. When Solomon learned of this, he attempted to kill Jeroboam, but he fled to Egypt and remained there until the king's death. During this period, Solomon began writing reflections on life. Many believe it was during this period that he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, which expresses a melancholy vision of human existence. The book differs from Proverbs, full of wise counsel, which he wrote in his youth. Now he seemed to realize the futility of many of the things he had pursued throughout his life. He speaks of the vanity of wealth, pleasure, and knowledge without the fear of God. The famous phrase, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity," reflects his disillusionment with what he had previously failed to appreciate. In his final days, Solomon realized that true wisdom lies not only in knowledge or material achievements, but also in maintaining a heart faithful to God. His late repentance was not enough to avoid the consequences of his choices, but it served as a warning to future generations. Solomon died after 40 years of reign, leaving behind a mixed legacy. His reign was one of the most prosperous in Israel, but his unfaithfulness to God led to the division of the kingdom shortly after his death. His son Rehoboam ascended the throne, but lacked his father's wisdom and quickly lost control of most of Israel. Solomon's story teaches us that even the most extraordinary gifts cannot guarantee a glorious end if the heart turns away from God. He had wisdom, power, and wealth, but all of it became empty when he lost his connection with the Lord. His end reminds us that true greatness lies not in what we accumulate, but in how we remain faithful to what truly matters. But even after Solomon's death, his influence endured. His words continued to resonate, his writings inspired generations, and his legacy still teaches us valuable lessons. What can we learn from Solomon's life today? How relevant is his story for those seeking wisdom and purpose? That's what we'll see next. Solomon's life was marked by striking contrasts. He began as the wisest and most blessed king in Israel's history, but he ended his days facing the consequences of his own choices. However, his legacy extends beyond his spiritual decline. He left behind valuable teachings that continue to influence generations to this day. But what can we truly learn from his story? Solomon teaches us, above all, that true wisdom comes from God. When given the opportunity to ask for something, he chose wisdom, and this made him an exemplary ruler early in his reign. His request demonstrated that true success lies not in wealth or power, but in the ability to distinguish good from evil and make just decisions. This principle remains relevant today. The pursuit of knowledge and understanding must always be linked to spiritual and moral values. His works also reflect timeless lessons. The book of Proverbs, for example, is filled with practical teachings on how to live honestly, prudently, and with the fear of God. He warns us of the dangers of arrogance, laziness, injustice, and bad company. Many of his advice are still quoted and applied in everyday life, serving as a guide for those seeking wisdom in life. However, Solomon's life also contains a powerful warning. Wisdom alone is not enough if the heart does not remain faithful to God. Despite all the knowledge he possessed, he allowed external influences to lead him astray. His numerous marriages to foreign women not only led to political alliances, but also to spiritual apostasy. This teaches us that even the wisest people can be vulnerable to temptation if they do not constantly maintain their connection to God. One of the most significant aspects of his legacy is the book of Ecclesiastes. Written in the final years of his life, it presents a profound and at times melancholy vision of human existence. Solomon reflects on the vanity of wealth, backbreaking labor, and the relentless pursuit of pleasure. He realizes that everything he achieved was ephemeral, and that without God, nothing has true meaning. The famous phrase, "all is vanity," rings a reminder that life cannot be defined solely by material goods or personal achievements. This lesson is crucial in our time. We live in an era when success is often measured by status, money, and superficial accomplishments. Solomon shows us that these elements, no matter how majestic they may seem, do not satisfy the soul. He concludes Ecclesiastes with a simple yet profound message. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is every man's duty. This statement summarizes the true purpose of life. Not to accumulate possessions or temporary glory, but to live in integrity and communion with God. Moreover, his trajectory teaches us the consequences of the choices we make. Solomon had the opportunity to end his life as one of the greatest examples of obedience to God. But he allowed his poor decisions to lead to the division of his kingdom. This reminds us that our actions today impact the future and those who come after us. Finally, his legacy challenges us to consider the balance between knowledge and faith. Reason and wisdom are precious gifts, but to be truly effective, they must be strengthened in obedience to God. Solomon's life included great achievements, but he shows us that without devotion to the Creator, even the wisest people can go astray. Solomon's story continues to inspire and warn. His name is written into history. And his teachings live on, offering advice to those seeking wisdom and purpose. His end may have been marked by mistakes, but his journey left a mark that will never be erased. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. Now, what did you learn most from it? Share it in the comments. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find many fascinating stories about ancient sages and spiritual self-development.